He married her out of duty, not affection. For years, he saw her as quiet, plain, just there. But while he chased success, she built something else. He didn't see it until the day everything else collapsed. He had a way of standing in a room like he was the only thing in it that mattered. Tall, composed, always with his cufflinks perfectly aligned. Daniel Whitaker was the kind of man people didn't interrupt. He had inherited the family land at 28, 200 acres of rolling hills, grain barns, and a reputation carved in hardwood. What he lacked in affection, he made up for in discipline. The house was quiet, polished, and cold, like its master. Eliza arrived in a second hand, dressed with her mother's Bible wrapped in a scarf. Her hands were small and calloused, her voice soft. She didn't bring a dowry, just her name, her quiet, and her habit of watching the world like it might speak to her if she stood still long enough. The arrangement had been made, practical, clean. She needed stability. He needed a wife. No one used the word love. The wedding was held in the back chapel of Ash Hollow Church during the late spring thaw. Her bouquet had dandelions in it. He didn't notice. Daniel drove home from the church in silence. Eliza folded her hands in her lap, the wedding band slightly loose on her finger. When they reached the house, she looked up at the porch like it was a hill she would have to climb every day. He opened the door, stepped aside, and let her walk in first. It was a courtesy. It also meant nothing. The first few months passed like the ticking of a grandfather clock, orderly, mechanical, emotionless. Daniel worked long hours managing the land and accounts. Eliza cooked, cleaned, and took quiet walks near the edge of the fields where wildflowers grew in clumps. At night, she sat by the window and mended old fabric. Sometimes she made handkerchiefs with little embroidered birds no one ever asked for. One evening, he passed by the parlor and saw her bent over her sewing. A dim lamp lit the side of her face. Her lips moved, a quiet hymn perhaps. Her fingers moved with practiced grace, the needle catching the light. He paused, then said without turning, "Why do you still spend your nights sewing, Eliza? We have more than enough. You could rest or read, or do something that matters." She looked up slowly, didn't frown, didn't explain, just folded the fabric neatly and set it aside. "I like it," she said. "It gives my hands something honest to do." He didn't respond, just nodded once curtly and went to his study. At the Sunday dinners with his cousins and their wives, Daniel never brought up Eliza's work. She sat at the edge of conversations like a shadow stitched to a brighter garment. She served food, poured water, and smiled when spoken to. But her eyes always drifted to the window, as if watching something far beyond the glass. In town, people said she was strange. Too quiet, odd. Pretty in a poor sort of way, they whispered. Keeps to herself. Not much of a Whitaker woman, is she? Daniel heard it all. Never defended her, never denied it. Instead, he focused on margins and yields, on drought forecasts, and seed rotation. His love was soil, measurable, obedient, predictable. Eliza, with her quiet hands and homemade aprons, didn't fit into any ledger column. But she saw everything. She saw how he visited the graves of his parents before each harvest, how he ran his hand along the barn door like it was an old friend, how he looked out over the hills before dinner, as if waiting for something to rise beyond the wheat. She never said any of it aloud. Instead, she left small notes in the pages of the books he stacked by the bed. Verses about kindness, endurance, and wisdom. He never acknowledged them, but he never threw them away. That winter, she started making quilts, scraps from town, donations from the church bin, each one stitched with care and folded into a trunk in the attic. No one asked for them, but she kept sewing, because love, for Eliza, was not loud. It was the quiet building of something no one noticed, until they needed it. Years passed like winter wind across an open field, steady, biting, and mostly unnoticed by those too busy surviving to feel the cold. In the Whitaker house, time left no marks on the walls, only in the silences that grew between the rooms. Daniel rose early and worked long. The land was his refuge, his proving ground, his kingdom. But it never softened him. He greeted labor with the same firmness he gave to everything else. No praise, no pity. The kind of man who fixed fence posts without gloves and reviewed grain prices while others watched the snow. Eliza never questioned it. She simply moved through the house like candlelight, flickering but constant. The pantry was always full, the linens always fresh. When workers came to repair a barn roof or rewire the silo, she brought them bread and cider. No one asked her to, no one thanked her, but they remembered. Every Sunday, she still sat with Daniel at the chapel pew near the back. She sang quietly. He didn't sing at all. Afterward, he spoke with the pastor about land taxes. She helped the church ladies tidy the sanctuary. Then they went home, always home. At night, Daniel read ledgers by the fire while Eliza sat on the floor nearby, cross-legged like a girl, stitching cloth from worn shirts and flour sacks. Once, he looked up and saw a quilt stretched across her lap with blues and grays arranged in perfect, humble balance. "You should sell those," he said, not unkindly. "Someone might want them." "I do sell them," she answered. "Quietly, a few shops out west, some online." He blinked, surprised. "When did you start that?" "A few years ago. I use what's left to help. With school books for some children at the church, and I keep a little saved for when it's needed." Daniel nodded, but something in him recoiled. Later, he asked her, half out of habit, half from pride, "You don't need to do that, Eliza. We're not short. That kind of thing. It's fine for women who have no husband." She folded the quilt quietly. "Sometimes, it's not about need," she said. "It's about preparing." That night, he dreamt of frost covering wheat. In the town, Eliza became known not as Mrs. Whitaker, but simply Eliza. Children from the poorer side of Ashbury Ridge whispered her name, with reverence. She taught them to read, helped them learn their letters with scraps of chalk and leftover newsprint. She once walked 5 miles in the rain to deliver warm bread to a boy whose mother was sick. Daniel never asked about those trips, but he noticed the boots by the door were always wet. In the 3rd year of drought, when crops thinned and the farm hands grew anxious, Daniel spent long nights poring over bank statements. Prices dropped, machinery failed. A shipment was stolen in transit. Then came the fire in the eastern pasture, started by lightning, ended by loss. It was the first time Eliza found him in the barn alone, head in his hands. She said nothing, just set down a tin of tea and stood beside him. He didn't look up, but he breathed differently, deeper, slower. They shared a home, a roof, a name, but for years not much more. And still, Eliza stitched. She kept every receipt, every letter from her customers. Not for glory, but for stewardship. She organized ledgers in quiet order, stored fabrics by season, colors by month. When the county fair came, she donated quilts anonymously to the church raffle. Won second prize. The announcer asked who made it. Eliza simply smiled from the crowd and clapped for the winner. On their 10th anniversary, Daniel brought home a silver necklace in a blue box. He gave it to her at the kitchen table without a word. She opened it, slowly touched it, then looked up. "Thank you, it's lovely," he nodded, poured himself coffee. That night, she placed the necklace in the drawer beside the ring box that had once held her wedding band. She still wore the ring, but now on a chain around her neck, beneath her sweater, close to her heart, where he never looked. She prayed every morning, quietly without ceremony, sometimes at the window, sometimes beside the kennel where Ranger, the large shepherd mix she'd adopted years earlier, waited for her touch. The dog followed her everywhere, slept beside the fire, walked with her to the edge of the woods and back, protected the barn at night. Daniel didn't care for animals, but he allowed it. Once, when a storm cracked an oak and nearly crushed the chicken coop, Ranger barked until Eliza woke Daniel in time to save them. "Smart dog," Daniel had muttered. "He listens to what others miss," she'd said. Daniel never answered that, and so the years passed, not empty, but unseen. And still, she stayed, because Eliza had never married. Wealth She had married a man, and somewhere deep beneath the frost, she believed spring would come. The year everything collapsed, the land gave no warning. The rain came too late. The yield was half of what it should have been. Grain prices plummeted, freight costs soared, and Daniel's quiet confidence, always measured, always stoic, began to show its first cracks. He didn't say much, but he spent longer at the kitchen table each night, ledger open, pen still, staring at the margin where numbers no longer lined up. He didn't tell Eliza at first. He didn't need to. She had lived long enough beside silence to understand its dialect. One evening she brought his plate to the table. Roast and potatoes, nothing fancy, and he didn't touch it. "Buyers are stalling," he said, not looking up. 2 vendors pulled out, banks tightening, something's shifting. Eliza didn't ask how bad, she only asked, "Do you want me to come with you to the meeting tomorrow?" Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I'll handle it." Next day, she saw him standing longer in front of the mirror, adjusting his collar, smoothing the cuffs of a shirt he hadn't worn in years. She didn't say a word, just placed his coat by the door. That winter was brutal. First came the foreclosure, warning on the South Tract, then the call from the bank about a missed payment. Machinery needed repair they couldn't afford. The storehouse roof caved in from ice. Every problem stacked like firewood, each piece heavy with consequence. The staff, 3 hired hands, left, one by one. Daniel told her they were moving on. Eliza didn't ask where. Then came the day he collapsed in the barn, a dizzy spell followed by a thud. He woke up flat on the hay, staring at the rafters, heartbeat uneven. Eliza found him minutes later, still trying to sit up, his pride more bruised than his bones. "I'm fine," he said, voice brittle. "You're not," she said, kneeling beside him. He didn't argue. That was how she knew he was afraid. The doctor called it exhaustion, aggravated by stress and untreated hypertension. Eliza cooked differently after that. Less salt, more broth. She set reminders on paper taped to the cupboard. He grumbled, but took the pills, and then, without warning, the bank took the second field. 2 weeks later, the rest, the Whitaker name, was erased from the county ledger with one cold signature. Daniel didn't speak for days, not in anger, not in sorrow, just silence, an abyssal one. Eliza kept lighting the stove each morning. She made soup, paid the electric, took on more orders, hand-stitched linens, quilts, winter cloaks, all sent quietly to stores across the state. She never told Daniel what she earned. She only told him when the bills were paid. One day, she left a sealed envelope on his desk. Inside were receipts, account records, a letter. He never opened it, but she noticed the envelope stayed in his drawer. He began to spend his afternoons on the porch, watching the driveway that no longer welcomed visitors. The farmhouse was quiet now. No staff, no deliveries, no illusion of wealth. And still, Eliza moved as she always had, with care, with grace, with the kind of strength that doesn't shift just because the floor gives out. It wasn't until he fell, sick, that the truth surfaced. It started with a cough, then fatigue, then a week where he didn't leave bed. The doctor came, listened, frowned, a respiratory infection, aggravated by stress and cold. Not life-threatening, not yet, but dangerous. Enough. Eliza set a chair by his bedside and never left it. She made warm compresses, cooked soup from scratch, read psalms aloud in the evenings, rubbed his feet with oil. Once he woke to find her asleep in the chair, her head resting on folded arms, the wedding ring glinting softly beneath her sweater. It was the first time in years that he cried, not from pain, but from sight. He saw her, not just the woman in his house, not the keeper of order or food or silence, but the wife, the covenant, the one who stayed. One night, in a moment between waking and fever, he whispered, "Why are you still here?" She stirred, brushed his brow with cool water and replied, "Because love doesn't wait to be loved back." He didn't answer, he only wept. The next morning she brought in a wooden box, old, polished, wrapped in faded ribbon. She set it beside his bed and walked out. Inside were dozens of letters, each dated, each written in her hand. They weren't addressed, just entries. Pages of prayers, reflections, dreams, frustrations, and love, unspoken, unmailed, but never abandoned. One read, "Today you didn't notice I changed the curtains. That's all right. I noticed the way you looked at the land like it still loved you, and that was enough." Another, "I heard you speak harshly to the pastor. I know you were just hurting. I forgive you. I do. I always will." And another, "The children in town call me Miss Eliza. I think I like that better than ma'am, but I still like hearing you call me wife, even if you don't mean it yet." He read them all, in silence, tears streaking the ledger of his pride. That night, he called her into the room. She stood in the doorway, unsure. He motioned to the box. This is what you were doing all those nights?" She nodded. "I never meant to hide them," she said softly. "But I also didn't want to force them on a heart that wasn't open." He looked at her, really looked, for the first time in over a decade. "Eliza, I don't know how to say sorry for 1,000 days. You just did," she said, "and that was enough. But redemption doesn't stop at words, and neither did Eliza, because tucked beneath the letters was something else. A business license, filed years ago, registered to her name. An account, a logo, a brand Eliza made. The same little quilts and linens he once dismissed. Now they supported them. Now they saved them." He looked at the paperwork, then at her. "You've been carrying this place for years." She smiled. "I wasn't carrying the place, Daniel. I was carrying you." That night they didn't say much more. They sat near the fire. The dog lay quietly by their feet, and Daniel reached, slowly, awkwardly, and took her hand. For the first time in years, it was warm and faithful and not too late. The return of light spring came quiet. No parade of color, no sudden thaw. Just the slow, honest work of life returning where it had once receded. The snow melted in strips along the fence line. Earth softened beneath Eliza's boots. The wind still held a bite, but it no longer wounded. Daniel began to rise earlier. At first, it was just to sit near the window and sip the weak coffee she made with cinnamon, the way he used to like it but never asked for. He didn't say much, but Eliza noticed how he listened more, watched more. When she opened the curtains, he looked at the trees. When she spoke, he answered with care, not just instinct. He walked with a cane for a while, the remnants of illness still clinging to his lungs like fog. But every day he made it further down the porch. Eventually, he made it to the barn. The bay, land too, had endured. Not all of it. They had lost acres, machines, more than neighbors would ever know. But the farmhouse still stood, the orchard still held, and the quiet fields beyond the ridge, they bloomed again. Because Eliza had planted. Months earlier, with no fanfare, she had tilled the forgotten plot near the west line and sown potatoes, squash and early herbs. No irrigation, just prayer, compost, and faith. When Daniel asked about it, she only said, "I wasn't sure what we'd have left, but I knew we'd need to eat." In town, the whispers began to change. Someone had seen her quilts in a gallery downtown. Another found her brand listed in a regional catalog. A teacher from the church told others about how Eliza had helped 10 children pass the county literacy test last fall, all in secret. They said her name with new weight now, not as the farmer's wife, but as a woman who had become something more, without ever asking for it. One afternoon, Daniel drove into town alone for the first time in years. The Tiwa truck sputtered, reluctant. The roads were muddy, but he made it. He stopped at the hardware store, picked up feed, salt, and flour. And as he stepped out of the truck, someone, an older man in a denim vest, nodded. "Good to see you, Mr. Whitaker." Daniel paused, then nodded back. That evening, he brought home a bundle of fabric Eliza had admired months before, laid it gently on the table. "Thought it'd make a nice cloak," he said, awkward. "Maybe for the spring fair, or one of your orders." Eliza touched. the bundle, didn't say a word. But later, when he wasn't looking, she wept in the kitchen, quietly, with the same grace she had suffered in. They didn't become a perfect couple overnight. Some days Daniel still forgot to say thank you. Some mornings, Eliza still felt the echo of old wounds. But love is not made in grand gestures. It's stitched like a quilt, thread by thread, layer by layer, with hands that don't quit even when the pattern goes unseen. And their pattern? It was finally becoming clear. One Sunday during service, the pastor gave a sermon on Proverbs 31. He spoke of the woman who wakes before dawn, whose hands spin flax and whose heart holds no vanity. Daniel sat in silence, then stood, unannounced, and said in a voice still hoarse from years of drought, "My wife is that woman. You all didn't see it, I didn't either, but she was that long before I earned her." No one clapped. They didn't need to. Eliza lowered her head, not in shame, but in honor. Because some praise doesn't lift, it roots. That night they sat, by the fire again. Roscoe, their shepherd mix, lay by the hearth, breathing slow. Daniel took her hand. "I sold the last share of the old tract," he said. "The debt's done, we're clear." Eliza nodded. "I know," she said. "I saw the paper. I was thinking," he added, "maybe we start a new plot, just us, nothing big." She smiled. "I already have," and she had. Tomatoes this time, peppers, herbs, quilts drying on lines strung between fence posts. Love, buried under frost, now breaking into bloom. They didn't go on vacations, didn't buy new clothes, didn't chase what the world called wealth. But their table was full, their home warm, and their hands, joined in the kitchen as the radio played faint hymns, finally met without flinching. Because the riches that matter most are the ones that still stand when everything else falls. And Eliza, she never needed to be seen to be strong. But now that Daniel had finally looked, he would never forget again. Thanks for spending time with us today. If this story meant something to you, pass it on. This is Still Standing Souls, real stories, quiet strength, lasting hope.